So today we will be starting with me as well as the illustrious Dr. John Brocato. John has been using AI a lot longer than I have in his classes, so he's the one you should really look forward to, but I'm going to go ahead and kick off. So today, the focus of the showcase is on generative AI in engineering education. This is for the second year in a row, the top topic on our interest survey that people said they want to learn more about through EETI. And so we are meeting that need. Before I get started, I do want to mention that next semester, it is very likely that I will lead a faculty learning community focused on generative AI in engineering education. So if you're at all interested in this topic, either right now or after you hear about the cool stuff today, please be on the lookout for that email next semester. I would love to have you as part of that community. So I'm going to kick us off by talking about how I use AI in my class. And I really use it for two things. First, I have some course policy that I've written around generative AI that I've found is really helpful for facilitating the learning process. And also I use AI for grading, which I think is something that I don't see a lot of people talking about, how we can use AI. And I think there are ways that we can use it responsibly in the grading process. So I'll talk about those. To start, though, I am going to talk about this little subtitle at the bottom. What kinds of productive thinking matter when it comes to generative AI? And I'm going to start us off by talking about what that means. So after I do that, I will then talk about how I implement Gen AI in my course syllabus and policy and some outcomes that's led to, as well as how I use Gen AI to make my grading better and easier. So part one, I think it's important to reframe, or if you don't already have a frame, to frame how we think about the use of generative AI as an educational technology. And for that, I found it really helpful when I read a report from some scientists at Massachusetts Institute of Technology entitled Generative AI in K-12 Education, an MIT Perspective. While they do specify K-12 education in the title, because that's the researcher's specialty, I think the concepts and ideas in here are just as applicable to higher education as they are to the K-12 space. And there are two major insights from this report that I want to share with you today that have shaped my use of AI in the classroom. The first insight is that generative AI is an arrival technology. So what does that mean? Well, most technologies in education are adoption technologies. These are things that we adopt as instructors and require our students to use. So things like learning management systems, where students go and see assignments and submit their work. Things like industry software that we teach students to use, like MATLAB, as well as educational assistance tools like Top Hat, Mentimeter, those kinds of things. These are examples of things that we adopt that our students would not be using if we didn't have them use it. In contrast, arrival technologies are technologies that students bring into our classrooms. They arrive in our classroom from students. So these are things like smartphones. This was the biggest arrival technology this century so far. Almost every student has a smartphone, and along with that, constant access to the internet, which is something that has changed the way that we think about how we teach in a lot of our classes. It's also brought us things like Chegg. And if you don't know what Chegg is, I will not be responsible as the person who has introduced you to it. But I imagine many people will prefer Chegg to not be on this list. And I think it's an interesting example because most uses of Chegg that we think of as students use it, we think of as cheating. And I think we've transferred a lot of that mindset when we think about AI as an arrival technology. And the important thing about arrival technologies is that students use them whether we want them to or not. And that means that while banning them is a good short-term solution, in the long term, all it does is punish the students who are willing to use it for productive purposes and enables the students who use it thinking that they can get away with it. And we can use it smartly by acknowledging that our students are using it whether we want them to or not. We can help them use it smartly. The second insight from the report is what generative AI allows students to do. So let's hear from the room. What does generative AI allow students to do in our classes? Right? Okay, right. Yeah, absolutely. Chatbots are great for creating writing things. So hopefully we want them to use it as an assistant for writing, but it also writes for them. And I think John is going to talk about some ways to address that specific thing. What other things does it allow them to do? Yeah. Get immediate feedback. You can ask it almost any question. It's easy to underestimate just how much of a marvel of technology that is, that you can ask a computer a, a casual question phrased anyway and get a meaningful response. And that's very valuable for getting feedback.
Generate a lot of ideas really quickly.
Brainstorming. You tell AI, hey, think of 5 ways I can design a new playground for students that allows them to play in these ways. Boom. List of 5 things there in an instant. Yeah, well, this will be the last one. Yeah, so again, that immediate feedback thing, being able to get instant feedback on whether their solutions are correct. So I should have known this audience. You all came up with some very good examples. I would say most people outside of this room would say this. It allows students to cheat. And the response, if you think of it as cheating, is to ban it. And as we discussed in the previous slide, that's a short-term solution that ultimately may cause more harm in the long term. I think a more productive way to frame it, that the report frames it, is that it allows students to bypass productive thinking. So what does that mean? When we ask students to produce something, there are a series of tasks that they normally have to go through to produce what we're asking of them. And we call that productive thinking. So think about if we ask students to design a graph in Excel, for example, they have to input the data into Excel. They have to reformat it in a way that Excel will produce a graph from it. They then have to go into the graph and modify the titles, the axes, the grid lines, all that stuff. And so each of those tasks are forms of thinking that students have to do to be able to make the product we are asking of them, productive thinking. And I think it's helpful to frame it this way because if we think about AI as allowing students to bypass productive thinking, we can start thinking about what kinds of productive thinking are okay to bypass and still achieve the learning outcomes that we want. So thinking back to that graph example, if my learning goal is to help students learn how to design good looking and meaningful, do I really care in that learning outcome that students know how to input the data into Excel and format it in graphs? If what I care about is, do you know how to design a graph that communicates things meaningfully? Or am I okay with them taking that part of the process and asking ChatGPT to do it for them if that allows them to then focus on the visual design aspects of the graph itself? And that is the key outcome of this insight. By bypassing productive thinking that doesn't matter, we allow students to focus on the kinds of productive thinking that do matter to what we want them to learn. And I'll give you some examples of how I do that in my class. So first of all, if we want students to start thinking about how they're using AI in terms of their productive thinking, we need to have course policy that presents it to students in that way and gives them concrete advice on how to do that well. And that's what I've tried to do with my syllabus. So I teach a course called InEd 7010, Preparing to be an Effective Engineering Educator. We use this as our textbook, How Learning Works. It introduces students to learning science principles and gives them an opportunity to apply those principles to their own teaching. And so as you see this, I am going to introduce you to a couple things that I ask my students to do in the course and how I frame the use of generative AI for those tasks. And I think the most important thing is that if we want students to be using AI to bypass the kinds of productive thinking that don't matter, we need to tell them what kinds of productive thinking do matter. And so this is something I did prior to AI taking over the world, but has become more and more relevant ever since it has. For every kind of assignment I ask students to do, I make it explicit why I'm asking them to do it. So I have students submit weekly reading reflections on a chapter in this book or a paper that I have them read. And I tell them the goal of this is to help them process the course material in a way that is meaningful to them. And that is the kind of productive thinking that matters to me, that they are understanding and processing this and making meaning of it for themselves. Notice what's not here. I don't care that students have perfect grammar in their reading reflections. I don't care that they know how to write or communicate super well. Unlike John, I do not teach a writing class. I am interested that they are processing these educational concepts, not that they know how to write those in a well-structured essay. And so before, I also give them examples of appropriate and inappropriate uses of AI that I'll show you in a second. But before I do that, I have a statement about what is appropriate for the use of AI in general. You do not have to read this whole thing, but I want to call out a few things. First, I point them to that MIT report that I showed you the title of, and I tell them, this is how I want you to think of AI, to think of what kinds of tasks and productive thinking it is allowing you to focus on and allowing you to bypass. And the other important part of this statement is down here. If you use generative AI tools to assist you in your assignments, you must credit that tool and state how you use it. And that is important because if I don't know that they are using that tool, I cannot help them use it effectively. The corollary to this is that students have to feel comfortable being honest with you. And so these are some things that I tell students at the beginning of class. My job is to help you be successful in this course, not to penalize you or trick you. I will never send you to the honor court for your use of AI unless I've specifically told you not to use it that way, or I find out that you have intentionally lied to me about your use of it. So the best way to get away with using AI is to be honest with me about your use of it. And if you're not sure what's appropriate, please ask me. And I have found that students have been very transparent in my course about how they've used AI tools. And then finally, I give them an example of an appropriate and inappropriate use for 3 of our most major assignments. So for our reading reflections, it is appropriate if you write the reading reflection yourself after reading the chapter and then pass it to an AI tool to help you with grammar, clarity, and formatting. Again, I don't teach a writing course. I care that you have processed these things. And if that tool helps you focus on the content, then by all means use it. It is not appropriate if you upload the digital chapter to ChatGPT and ask them to print out a summary of the chapter for you. And so by giving examples like this, I found that they answered most of the ambiguities that students had about what is and isn't appropriate uses before I even had to bring it up in class. So you might be asking, the CTL has a list of statements you can put about your use of AI in syllabi, and one of them is, you just can't use AI. And that seems a lot simpler. Is all this work to really specify all these things worth it? And to answer that, I would like to give you an anecdote of something that happened this semester. It actually happened 2 weeks ago. In my course, there was a student who specified that they used AI for their reading reflections. And we were doing a reading reflection on a paper about the music model of motivation. Some of you have heard me talk about this, but it's a model of motivation that basically has 5 components to it: empowerment, usefulness, success, interest, and caring. And the student's reflection had a sentence that read like this: empowerment is when instructors allow students to demonstrate the usefulness of their success. Clearly written by AI. If I had not had the students specify how they use their AI tools, this would have really irritated me as an instructor. I would have been like, this student clearly used an AI tool. They didn't think about this. These sentences make no sense. And I would have given them a 0 and maybe moved on. But they did specify it. They said, I have used this AI tool to help me write this reading reflection. And so my response was, I'm giving you a 0 on this assignment for now. The way you're using this tool is not working, and we need to talk about it. And so the student met with me after class. I asked him, what's going on? And he was like, I'm an international student. This is my first semester in PhD. I am used to doing math problems. I'm used to doing science problems. I have never encountered a course where I have had to write a summary of a chapter, especially one that is not in my native language. And so I use these tools to help me write it. Please help. That is how he ended it. Please help. This interaction would not have happened if I hadn't had this policy in my course, because now that he has said this, I recognize what kind of problem this is. It's a metacognitive problem. This student is in a new learning environment and they genuinely don't know how to succeed in it. And so I told him, I want you to look at the rubrics that I have for each of the reading reflections. And as you're reading, look for the keywords in the chapter that match those rubrics. And I want you to stop and write 3 sentences about what the chapter said. Just 3 sentences about that part of the chapter. Submit that as your reading reflection. You can pass it through AI to clear up grammar if you want, but that's how I want you to approach this assignment. Has this worked? I don't know yet. I haven't graded another reading reflection since I told him that. But that conversation alone was incredibly meaningful to me, and I think that made it worth it. But students aren't the only people who have productive thinking they might want to bypass. We have that too. And so when I'm grading, I use a relatively simple rubric. This is for one of my reading reflections, where it's like I had them read 2 chapters. I want you to write a reading reflection that summarizes these things in the chapters. Some students format their answers so I can find those things very easily and confirm that they did this part of the assignment. Some students write me essays. And it can be really exhausting to student after student going through these essay responses and trying to find the things I'm looking for. And I give poor feedback when I'm exhausted. And for better or worse, ELC structures the assignments in first to last name order. So those students with last names that start with Z are not getting great feedback. And I wanted to fix that. So I decided, what if I can offload the seeking part of the work so I can focus on what the student did and didn't do and give them good feedback? The problem with this, of course, is that sometimes AIs hallucinate. If you ask Google about the new cardio exercise running with scissors, it'll tell you about all the benefits about it if you ask it to do so. And so I don't think AI is at the point where we can trust it to grade students' work on its own. And so my solution was to design a prompt that removes the need for trust. So rather than say, here are the criteria, tell me if the student met it or not, I said, I'm going to provide you with a series of written passages. Evaluate each on the criteria below. Provide your response in the form of a table where the first column, each row lists the criterion, the second column lists if it's met, and the third column lists example quotes from the passage that demonstrate whether or not it's met. And fortunately for us, AI is a lot better than some of our students at following an assignment submission. So when I put that in, I get a response like this. This is an actual response from one assignment from a student that I graded, where it said that they met 3 of the 4 criteria, and they provided quotes for how they met it. So I looked at each of these, and I looked at the quotes, and I decided that these top 2 were good. Based on the quotes, I think this student has read it and understands the content. I don't trust the AI that the student didn't include this. So that is for me to flag to say, I need to go and manually review their assignment to see if this thing is in there. And similarly, the quotes on the 4th one are a little, I'm not sure this really demonstrates they know it. The criterion is discusses how instructors can use tone, context, belonging, and presence to influence course climate. And one of the sentences, the feeling of belonging is important to ensure an inclusive course climate. It's sort of answering the question with the question. And so that's a potential false positive. So I checked to see what that student actually said about all of those things. In this case, the AI was actually right. The student did not include anything about that 3rd criteria, and the student did elaborate a lot more on those points. So they were not false negatives or positives, they were correct. But some responses did have both false negatives and false positives, so it was still worth double checking. And it saved me actually a lot of time on grading, and I was able to give better feedback to students. Yeah, go ahead. I did use ChatGPT, yeah. So in summary, I think it's helpful to think of generative AI as bypassing productive thinking instead of cheating, because it helps us turn it into a helpful tool for learning. Course policies help us to control and understand how our students use generative AI so that we can coach them accordingly. And then finally, it can be a tool to help us offload the worst parts of grading so that we can focus on the parts that matter, provided that we build in a way to evaluate its accuracy through good prompt design. That is all for me. Any questions? We have about 10 minutes for questions. Rashida.
Fed the ChatGPT, this is in terms of the grading part,
Mhm.
the prompt. Did you, or were you able to, I guess, feed it just a rubric prior to, and like, I guess, what were the results from feeding it the rubric compared to feeding it the prompt?
I fed it both. So on this page, so when I wrote the prompt, I included the criteria for the rubric below. Now, my rubric was a very simple rubric. It's is it in there or is it not? But if you have a more complex rubric, I know that ChatGPT has the ability to take and read documents. So I imagine you could tell it to put someone on a spectrum based on the descriptions of what each criterion, what an answer of each criterion looks like, and you can use it similarly that way.
Did your students know that you were using AI to assist in your grading process?
Yes. So do my students know about this? They do. So just as in fact, I phrased it this way in the ELC announcement. I ask you to be honest with me about your use of AI. So I'm going to be honest with you. I told them this exact prompt that I put in it and how I used the results of this prompt. And students, I had a couple students thank me at the beginning of class for that. Yeah. After they got their feedback, immediately after they got their feedback. Yeah. So the way I structure my class, and I recognize this isn't feasible for all classes, is students have an infinite number of resubmissions. If they can address the feedback I give them, they can get full credit on the assignment as long as they submitted it on time. So they can always challenge my decision by either resubmitting or approaching me about it. Yeah. Go ahead.
Found that the quality of what it gives me when I put it in the prompt is directly proportional to the quality of the prompt that I give it. So I was just wondering, this prompt that you have here, was this the first thing you put in by chance, or did you, how many iterations of the prompt did you have to go through before it gave you something that you could actually use?
Miraculously, it worked the first time. This was my first prompt design. Now, I actually, in a future assignment, I gave it the same kind of prompt. And one thing I caught it doing was it was using quotes from previous passages that I input it as evidence for the current passage. So it was using previous assignments that I fed it. So I had to be very clear about it for future assignments, like make sure that you are only evaluating each passage I give you on that passage itself. And that fixed the issue. So yeah, we do have to babysit it a little bit to get it right. Let's go back here. Yeah. Manually. So one thing that really helps me evaluate is by having it in a table format like this. I can see the exact quotes it's using to make the claims that it's making. And so I can evaluate it there. If there's any ambiguity, I go back and I evaluate the students' work manually because I think that we owe that to our students to make sure that we have strong evidence for the decisions we're making in grading. Yeah. Rachel.
Also say only include direct quotes from paper 5.
I did check the first couple of responses and all the quotes it gave me were in there. So that was enough to make me trust it. But now I'm a little paranoid, so I might do it again. So thank you for bringing that up. Fred.
Occurs to me that you're using AI to essentially do what you told your students not to do. In other words, you've asked AI to summarize a piece of writing and tell you what it contains.
I have a I do have a response, but I'd like you to finish your question.
Is the quality of the prompt that you've given, and you're specifically looking for feedback rather than the productive thinking, right? Short circuiting the productive thinking. My question really is,
respond to my first comment. My question really is, have you considered engaging with the students around prompt development that will enhance their ability to dialogue through the AI?
That's a great question. If more of my students use the AI tools, I would do that. So far, I've had 3 students that have stated they used AI tools. And the ones that haven't stated that, I believe them. It was human writing. I think that if you are going to, especially for a large class, I have 16 students, so I can handle this on a per student basis. But if you have a large class that might use these, I think that's a great exercise to really talk about what kinds of prompts can help you get good results from AI that bypass the right kinds of thinking that we want. In terms of the learning outcomes of this, so with my students, I want them to process the chapters and make sure that they understand it and made meaning of them. I don't need to do that for the student assignments. I don't need to make student assignments meaningful to me. What I've found is that my job in giving feedback to students is identifying where their areas of improvement are so that they can resubmit and address my feedback. And I found that in previous semesters, I would get to the end of the student list and I would get lazy because I was tired, and I would be more lenient with those students because I was just like, I don't want to have to read through this 5-page essay to get what I want. And so like I would look for keywords and just see if those were there. Maybe they were high quality, maybe they weren't. I probably shouldn't be saying this over a recording, but it's great example. Found that this helped me be less exhausted through the whole process. So I gave equal quality feedback for all of my students, and that's more valuable to me than. I hope that helps. This will have to be the last question.
Make sure you.
So how do we prevent AI warfare? I'm going to use AI to check your AI to check my AI. To me, having the direct evidence of exactly why you're able to make the statements you're making in grading are an important thing. So I actually save all of the prompts that I use, and I can go back and recheck the student's assignment. And also, if there are spaces where I manually reviewed the assignment, I specified that in the assignment feedback as well. So AI said this. I think you actually did include that. So yeah. Thank you, everyone, so much for your time. I hope this was helpful. We're now going to transition to Dr. Brocato, who's going to talk about how he uses AI in his engineering communications course. Let me get you pulled up here, John.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here to talk about this topic today. The title of it is Writing AI and the Engineering Professional Persona. So in terms of an overview, I'm going to start with a prediction. And then I want to look at a couple of similar new technologies that are, similar to AI in the sense of the social response to them, the cultural response to them. And then get into AI in my classes, AI policies, some of the assignments and responses that we use, the matter of citing AI in ChatGPT, and then also AI detection. So I want to start with a prediction, which is that before long, AI is going to make my job obsolete. Writing teachers, at least in their present form, will no longer exist. And I think the reason for that is industry is one of the drivers of what we do in an engineering curricula. And if what they have wanted for decades, longer maybe, is good writing from their students, and they're devoting time, energy, resources to it one or another, but that writing can be done, why would we need to do that? Just effective, if not more so. Now I'm talking about professional communication here, not poetry and creative writing and creative nonfiction and things like that, although that could be part of it. But I'm not being facetious. I truly think this is going to happen at some point. I think the positives outweigh whatever negatives, and almost that doesn't matter because in the internet age, convenience trumps everything. So that it doesn't really matter. The negatives just sort of float away, and it's like, well, it's so easy to get this. We'll just do it this way. And I really do think that that's going to happen at some point. I hope it happens after I retire, but we'll see. Sonic is probably always hiring, so I could go to work there if I couldn't do this. Okay, so obviously it's a prediction. Who knows whether it'll come true? But this is what we stand to lose by that. Writing is the highest form of thinking, as evidenced by neuroimaging, which shows that more neural networks are activated simultaneously during writing than during any other cognitive activity. Now, I've been a writing teacher for 28 years, if you count grad school. I think I knew this, not with an fMRI machine or neuroscience, but I think I knew that this is what one of the real values of writing. And I recently discovered this book, Writing, Thinking in the Brain, is not out yet. It's coming out in November. And I have already ordered it because I want to see what it says, beyond this quote. But so it's not so much just writing skills. And this is one of the distinctions I try to make for students. We talk about writing skills, and it's not wrong because words are squishy. But what we really should be talking about are writing habits, because communication is a behavior. It's not a skill in that we've, worked with a welding torch enough to know how to use it. It's that it's a behavior we engage in. And so improving writing a lot of times is reversing bad habits, which humans are notoriously bad at. So that is what's given me a job for the last 3 decades. But it's not even the skills or the behavior or anything. It's that writing is good for our brains. That's why writing is important. That's why we don't want, or we shouldn't want, AI to take that task over completely. Now, it may not stop the prediction that I had there. The idea of the convenience of it, the practicality, whatever, may still weigh out. But writing is good for our brains. And one of the comments that one of the principles that I try to get students to see, I talked to the ECAM capstone class last night, and one of the things I try to get them to say is, what's the most basic reason that people struggle with writing? And they have all kinds of different answers, and they're all valid. The real reason to me is procrastination. We put it off. And I tell them the dirty little secret, like, well, if your professors procrastinate with writing too. So if they scold you, know that they're also doing it, right? It's not, and that's like, I have 5 different writing projects I should be way farther along on, and I'm not, because Instagram is really compelling, and I just waste too much time with that, or something else, or building an Excel sheet or something like that. But we procrastinate because it's hard, or we don't like it, right? And so I build that all into what we're talking about as a way of saying, all of that is sort of bad news because you're going to have to do it anyway. It's why I'm here talking to you, because engineering, as it turns out, is a very communication intensive field. And so you're going to have to do a lot. And it's not only that it's going to help you in the job, it's going to help you get promoted once you get out in the workplace. It's good for your brain to actually do this. And so I think of that in the context of AI, of what we stand to lose. And I'm very much not a sky is falling Luddite with AI, like, oh, we should never use it. You'll see, I'm not like that at all. But I do think there's some things that we want to hang on to for this reason and others like it. It's good for our brains. It's that all the neurons activated simultaneously. It does that more than any other cognitive activity. Now, another quote I saw recently in a piece by Ted Chiang in the New Yorker. And what he says is, the task that generative AI has been most successful at is lowering our expectations. It is a fundamentally dehumanizing technology because it treats us as less than we are, creators and apprehenders of meaning. It reduces the amount of intention in the world. So Chiang is a real buzzkill when it comes to AI. And I don't agree with him. I'm showing you this because I think it's a perspective worth considering. I don't agree with him. There's been a lot of pushback against this article, with people saying he's wrong about this and he's wrong about that in different points. But it's an idea worth considering, that you do run the risk of reducing the amount of intention in the world. You do run the risk of treating people as less than creators and apprehenders of meaning by offloading that to a machine that can do it as good as we can, we hope, if we tend to think that way. So that's another perspective on that. And then I don't want to spend too much time on this, but in addition to being a writing teacher, I'm a huge history nerd. And so I always want to contextualize these things historically, especially when there are people who literally, oh, AI is going to be the death of us. The sky is falling. How will we ever survive this? And it's interesting to look at things like social media, like the internet, like calculators and all the rest, that did they make the sky fall or did they not? And I had to excise something from this in the interest of time, but we had a talk in here recently in the last couple of years by David Joyner at Georgia Tech, who said we tend to overestimate the short-term effects of new technology and underestimate the long-term effects, which is an incredible concept to think about. I think it's 100% true as well. And so we think about the stuff that's right in front of us and we're worried about how it's going to go, but we don't really think about what's going to happen long-term, right? And I'm old enough to remember something that some of you may have heard of before, a library, like a building with books in it, that we had to put clothes on and go to the library to do research. And instead of now, it's so, simple and convenient to do it like that. And there was a sense with some older professors when I was in grad school that this internet fad is going to go by one day and that's not real research and all the rest of it. I mean, that was a real thing that people did. And of course, that's just an outdated, way of thinking about it. But not just to point these out, but are any of these generative in the way that AI is generative? Or calling back to John's presentation, are they adoption technologies? Are they arrival technologies? And I would love to spend the rest of the time talking about this because it's so fascinating to me. We don't have the time to do that. I'm not sure. I haven't even decided myself about all of this. I'm still trying to think about it. I don't think any of them are generative in the way that AI is, and that just creates quote unquote brand new content. So we may be working with a technology that's different than all this other stuff we can point to and say, well, it was like when we had, the appearance of the laptop, the appearance of the smartphone. This may be different from that. Time's going to, because it's changing every day and all the rest of it, but it is something we're thinking about. I engage students with this kind of topic all the time to get them to think about this stuff. People who were born in 05 or 06 who have they don't even laugh when I say library. As a joke, they're just like, okay, well, what is that? Like, they don't know. It's not anything or encyclopedias. They're like, an encyclopedia? Is that like Wikipedia? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It is. It's the paper version of Wikipedia, in fact. I'll show it to you one day. So let's get on to my classes. The policy I have is broken into a few parts. The first of which is you may not use ChatGPT or any other AI software to create work that you then submit as your own in this class. So I'm old school and hardcore about that. As a writing teacher, plagiarism is always on my mind, not as a penalty or as a ha-ha gotcha. I hate that, but to try to help students avoid it and for them to understand what it is, what the stakes are, and so forth. So even though I'm very open and generous about the use of AI in the class, they have to take responsibility for the things that they submit. Anything they turn in with their own name is their responsibility. And that gets to be tricky. The more we get into the digital age, the internet age, that can get away from us very quickly. So I say that, but then I also say we will examine AI technology use in academia and industry, including maybe using it in this class, using it in class in a few ways. We also use it as a point of analytic comparison with your own writing. I'm going to show you an example of that in a minute. And the biggest thing that I always tell them, very similar to what John said with his own, is if you're ever unsure about this or anything regarding this class, please ask me, especially this though, because I'm a gigantic nerd about it and I love talking about it. If you email me about this, I promise I'm going to send you back more than you want. Myself and talking about it, but please ask. Don't labor in ignorance, or worse yet, go, he has a lot of students, he's probably not going to notice. I'm going to notice. I'm paid to notice. So please, ask and we can talk about that. So one of the first assignments that I give them is a reflection assignment. What constitutes appropriate academic use of AI? I like to crowdsource this stuff with my students. What do you think about it? What do you think is a good way to use this academically? And even phrasing it as a different type of question. If you have any desire to use this in your classes, what do you consider to be an appropriate way to do it? And so I have a couple of examples from what they told me. I think it's dangerous when it comes to supplying entire papers or just giving the answers, but it is helpful to use it to help structure outlines or for tutoring purposes. This is very representative of a lot of the answers that students give. A lot of times AI can be wrong, so it is imperative that users understand the limitations. And that seems obvious to us probably, but I highlighted it because I'm glad a student said it, because sometimes they don't know this, or they apparently don't know that. And so that also forms a big sort of part of the platform of what we talk about with this. This is probably my favorite one. Explain hydrophilic properties of cells to me like I'm 5 years old. This is a non-generative use, not directly creating content that could be submitted and reviewed for a grade. And my comment that I have here in the box and with the arrow is this is very, very debatable. Now, I think the first part, explain it to me like I'm 5 years old, is a brilliant way to use it as a starting block for your own understanding and how you're going to communicate that to your reader. I think it's a great way to start. But to just then proclaim this is non-generative, it really depends on how you use it. And so for this person's response, I went in and I said, look, I need to talk with you about something. And then just long paragraph about how this could wind up being generative and you don't even know it. Take this, because I so many times I hear students say, well, you can only say this so many ways. I'm like, no, you can say it a bunch of different ways. I'm not letting you off that easily. It's just, you're not going to do it that way. And so you have to be careful about not taking something that it gave you as a definition and saying, well, this is just the definition of it. No, that's ChatGPT's definition of it. It's not yours. And so you have to be super careful with that. In my opinion, there is no academic setting where artificial intelligence could be appropriately used. This person's response was much longer. And knowing this person, they really mean it this way, like don't use ChatGPT at all, which is, I think, the only student I've ever had say that, which was pretty interesting. I certainly don't agree with that necessarily, but I asked for their opinions, and I do like that this person has said that. Maybe they'll change their mind, maybe they won't. So one of the things I express, or I try to convey to students, is that from my perspective, in terms of a writing class especially, the main threat with non-generative AI is that even if you think you're using it for non-generative tasks like proofreading, it can and will add its own content to your content. Not every time, but it does happen. A couple of years ago, I had a team working on basically the topic of this forum, you know, the future of AI, and mainly it was in industry instead of just academia. But one of the things that the students did is get ChatGPT to create a research paper based on some particular topic. And the result actually kind of scared them because it generated this very official looking research paper that read beautifully and had this formal, thorough, professional looking reference section that was 100% fictional. None of it existed. They went and looked for whatever the journal was called, not there. This author who wrote this particular paper, that's citation number 12, doesn't exist. None of it was real. And they were like, oh my God, I didn't know it could do this. Like, yeah, you didn't ask it to do that and it did it anyway. So we have to be very careful. Independent human verification is still imperative. John talked about a very similar thing with his class, and it's absolutely true. Nothing replaces our eyes on it as a verification step, if nothing else. Incidentally, this really should be true for any information from the internet. And I'm old enough that I remember crossing that divide between paper and then now everything's on the internet, that people were like, well, I guess you can do research on the internet, but gosh, you don't know who wrote it and how to be, and now nobody cares about that. Nobody even thinks about it. Right. And so we have to, that's fine. I love that it's there, but we have to be careful. We can't just accept, absolutely anything. And so that's one of the things we talk about a lot in my class when we get to documenting sources and citing is check it yourself, because you can't guarantee that that's absolutely what it says it is. I also require students to include a disclaimer saying things like, I use no AI in creating this assignment, or in creating this assignment, I used it for grammar checking, relevant information searching, but I wrote it without entirely on my own without directly copying anything. There's a lot of the honor system involved in this because it's difficult to pin this down whether they've actually done it or not. But I like to have it in writing as a statement for them. I think it's important. I'll admit that it's also one of those situations about giving them enough rope to hang themselves that if they get into trouble with AI and come back and say, remember this part on your first page where you said you didn't use AI at all? Do you want to revise that now? And yeah, okay, right, I did. I'm sorry, I used it. So I like having that statement there, but I had the idea to do it because I would see articles online, AI disclaimers at the bottom for things that the author had used to do, had used that technology for the article. And I thought, well, that's not a bad idea to do it that way. Just have them put the disclaimer there. The one that I think is really significant is that for every major writing assignment in the class, I require them to turn in an AI version with it. That is, they write their own version that they're going to turn in as a final draft, and then they input that prompt to AI, take what it gives them, and turn that in as a separate file, along with a brief analysis, 6 to 8 sentences, comparing their version with the AI version. And that has turned out to be very, very useful. I think very eye-opening for them. It's been eye-opening for me as well. And so I have a couple of responses for them to look at. It does a great job at making me sound more desirable to a hiring manager than mine. So just openly admitting AI is better at this than I am, right? It's very similar, I would say shockingly similar, but the AI learned how to write a better sources I did, so I can't say I'm too shocked. That's a profound insight too. It learned from the same sources I did. That was a cool way to say it. I do find it very interesting how AI knew to include my job at Pfizer. I assume this is because I have put my resume into ChatGPT for advice before. Having looked at so many templates online, I probably subconsciously copied the same style that I had seen, and so did ChatGPT. So they started aligning themselves with ChatGPT. It learned how to do this like I did, and so that's probably why it's fairly similar. And then some other improvements. This one, I think, was one of the ones to call out. By combining the positive aspects of both versions, I could identify and correct the lacking parts of my letter sent, that is, sell myself as an eager but a competent candidate. And that strikes me as a particularly useful way to employ this, to say, what does it have that I might be able to use, and how can I combine that with my own? Obviously not taking the exact words and so forth, but being careful how we do that. I think that's somebody who's really thinking about how they want to use this. So the first assignment in this one particular class, BioE 2100, is a cover letter or a personal statement. I like to start a little bit slow, but also with an assignment that's brief, but it's also practical. It's very useful for them to do it. And this past spring, when we were in that phase where they were doing this assignment, I thought, gosh, they're all so similar and almost boilerplate a lot of times. Maybe we should just let AI say, all right, we're going to concede. AI should do these and not worry about it and move on to other stuff. But as I often do, I ask the students, I said, what do y'all think about this? Should we do this as an assignment? Should it be left to AI? Almost nobody said let AI do this, which is, I did not expect that. I expected them to be like, yeah, we could spend time on other things. This is pretty easy. They can actually do that. Almost nobody said that. And a lot of the common responses were, this was a useful exercise. I made an existing letter or statement even stronger because I don't require them to create it from scratch. If you have one that you've used, this is a great opportunity to make it better. Okay? If you have to create it from scratch, that's wonderful, which is what this person is alluding to. I've never even had a cover letter before, so this assignment was hugely helpful. So I abandoned this idea completely, at least for the time being. We're just going to keep doing this as an assignment. But I expected, some part of them, maybe even the majority, to say, yeah, this is probably something AI can just do. And they didn't. So they surprised me that way. It's always nice this far into a career to still be surprised. So we've gotten to the point where what this guy calls the big three. Craig Gallagher is an academic on Twitter. I know it's supposed to be called X, but I'm never going to call it X. It's Twitter. I don't care what Elon Musk says about much of anything. So he says that the big three, that is APA, Chicago Manual Style, and MLA, have all established a citation standard for ChatGPT. And I went and looked this up, and they have. It's right in the stuff that they've created. IEEE, which is a pretty common one in engineering, no stance on that yet. They haven't gotten to that, which is pretty ironic, I think. But what this guy pulls out is putting the company behind the generator, OpenAI, and the date you generated it counts, even though the text is not replicable or searchable. This is a paradigm shift in real time, because up until now, part of the point of citing sources, in addition to showing your work and proving to your instructor that you haven't plagiarized or that you got these ideas from somewhere, is to allow readers to go look at your sources for whatever reason they want to look at them, including their own edification, their own learning. This is an interesting topic. I want to go read some more on this. That's not really possible here, because what they're citing in ChatGPT does not exist outside of this instance. There, as far as I'm aware, there is no precedent for this. It's completely just out there in the wild. Like, I don't know how we're going to do this. This is crazy. It doesn't exist. He's very negative about it, not Ted Chiang negative, but getting pretty close, almost dystopian. He just flat out says ChatGPT just plagiarizes different texts the next time. I would love to debate him about that, not on Twitter, like in person. But so this is where we are now. We're getting to a point where we're going to start citing this. I'm going to engage my students with this, that we're getting ready to talk about documenting sources in their later assignment. And I have to grapple with this. How are we going to do it? And I'm going to ask them. I'm going to say, what do y'all think? How should we actually do this? But this is wide open territory. Like, I have no idea where it's going, right? We'll see. I don't know. Now, John, how am I doing on time? Oh, great. So I'm a big believer and user of Turnitin. I've used it for decades now, and I realize that it can kind of be divisive. Some people don't like it. I think it's a very useful checkpoint again, it's a technology. So by default, it's flawed. But it's a very useful way to at least get one picture of what the writing looks like. And much like John talked about not penalizing students immediately or not out to get anybody, I deploy Turnitin in a way that students really can, and I encourage them to use it themselves. If you've been citing sources and you have any sort of idea that maybe you haven't done it right, or maybe there's something needs correcting, go ahead and turn it in early, get the similarity report. If there are problems, number one, ask me if you think there are problems, and I'm be all too happy to talk with you about it, but then revise it and turn it in again, because it'll generate an all new similarity report at that time. And so you can kind of weed that stuff out. It's a very useful thing to do. And so I've done that for a long time. I have it for every major assignment in the class, but as of the last couple of years, it now has an AI detection functionality with it, which was awful at first. It was so bad, and it's gotten a lot better. And so it comes up as a different element in the similarity report, and it gives you the percentage, and it also says, this is very small, and so you can't really see it. AI detection scores below the 20% threshold, which we do not surface in new reports, have a higher likelihood of false positives. So right out of the gate, it even says if it's below 20, chances are this is probably not something that you can count on. And I count on this to be automatically correct, even less than what Turnitin tells, but it is a useful data point to have at least, and to show it to students. It's called out some problems with students where they did either use ChatGPT in a way they probably shouldn't have, or they used it in what they thought was a non-generative method, and it actually added stuff to their content. And so when that happens, I engage with the student and I talk with them about, so what happened and where do we go from here? I.e., it's not automatically punitive. I do not like the gotchas. I'm not out there to get anybody. I will put the clamps to them if they've really, done something horrific. But otherwise, I want to educate them. I want them to learn like how not to do this and why we shouldn't do it and everything else. So my main advice to students, always ask what you're allowed to use and do in their class. In reference to AI for sure, but anything else as well. All the writing seminars I give throughout the college is one of the main things I stress. Ask your instructor. If you don't think you have enough guidelines about how to set this report up, ask them. And if they're angry and tell you to go away, now you know. Or they may say, oh, I'm glad you asked, and they clear it up for you. But don't labor in ignorance like that. And for sure with me, you're not going to bother me with questions. You're absolutely not. So always find out. It's not an excuse to say, well, I didn't know we couldn't do that with AI. Find out. Don't use this brand new technology that has barely any rules and say, it's probably okay. That's a terrible idea. Find out what the guidelines are. You are responsible for all of the content that you submit. That's once you submit it in a final draft, it is all yours. And so you have to take responsibility for it. Anything that's not cited is assumed to be content that you created. Anything that's not cited is assumed to be content that you created. That's not a way that they typically look at it. And so I try to turn their heads around a little bit with that. Like if it's, you can't just grab stuff and use it and think, oh, that's just common knowledge. There's no such thing, and you're not allowed to do that, right? So that's one of the things that I talk about with them, and I think that kind of taking advantage of that knowledge for themselves is one of the ways that we can help them not do it. So I'm at the end. Thank you. Please use me. Although I work in CMBE, I'm also a resource for the college, and I'm happy to help with things like communication talks and classes, even proofreading or reviewing, and assignment consultation. I've helped several faculty members building writing assignments into their class they wanted, building rubrics, but also Turnitin. If you've never used Turnitin and you have writing in your classes, I can help you do that. Obviously, Center for Teaching and Learning has tutorials. I'm a bit less long-winded than those tutorials, so I might be a faster way of helping you do that. And then this QR code is a Google Drive folder chock full of writing resources that you can take and use. I add to it every few days usually because I think of something new, but I hope that you'll take advantage of that and of me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So we are actually right at time. So excellent timing, John. We don't have time for any questions, but I know John is always excited to talk about these kinds of things with colleagues. So please feel free to come up to him, exchange emails with him. And thank you all so much for coming today. There are 3 leftover foods in the back. Please feel free to grab some. Any food waste you have, please dispose of in one of the red bins in the back there. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.